Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is making effective and compliant advertising claims in South America. So we're looking particularly at South America and Latin America today to really think about what claims we can make over there and what the regulations are surrounding that. I'm really lucky to be joined by Maycon today, who is a consultant at NW Innovations. So he's got a huge wealth of background, which he'll talk about in a little bit to introduce himself. But he's obviously based in Brazil, so we've got someone that's really on the ground there and that's really in touch with the regulations that can talk about it all in more detail. So today we're going to be looking at the advertising standards within South America. So what's the legislation there? What organizations are involved? If you're advertising there, who do you need to be kind of looking out for to see what the codes are? If there's any challenges there, we're going to discuss those a bit as well. And then we're also going to look at how we substantiate our claims. So I'll talk about consumer research, as that's what Ayton Global Research conduct. And I'm going to share a case study as well to go through that in a bit more detail. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm the regulatory director at Ayton Global Research. So I've worked there for about 8 years now and have kind of started off as a study manager, getting to know how to conduct studies properly. And in that, I found I was really interested in the regulations surrounding the studies that we conduct, kind of why do we do it? And a lot of that is mainly to do with claim substantiation. So I like to know kind of the global regulations about what we're conducting to make sure that our clients can make some fantastic claims about their products in the territories that they're going to sell them and that they're compliant basically. So Maycon, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you, Carys, again for this opportunity. Uh, I'm Maycon Ribeiro. I'm from Brazil. I have around 24 years experience in R&D. During this period, I worked in 70 years in Johnson Johnson after level for BDF in India, when you have a responsibility to launch the all brands in Latin America. And 2006 was created the MW Innovation, when you have the main objective to help the companies to solve the issues about formulations, claims, products, process, and everything else. Again, Carrie, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much for joining. So to get started, I just want to talk about the cosmetics market within Latin America. So for those of you who are already selling there, or perhaps you're thinking of selling there, it gets us kind of in that mindset of why it's a really good market, basically. So basically, there's some really good market research that I found. And one's from Nielsen, where basically they've categorized people in Latin America by the luxury products they're buying. So it's quite interesting to see the sort of millennials who are more likely to buy hair care, Generation X who are going to pay more for oral products, the baby boomers who are looking for hair care as well, and then also the silent generation, which is your over 65s that are looking at premium body care. And I really like this diagram they put out. It just gives you a really good idea of, if you're looking at those luxury markets, who is your consumer in those kinds of exact product specifications. So if you're looking at marketing those kinds of products, you know who you're marketing them towards. There's also a kind of really huge market for women's cosmetics, particularly in Brazil, but there's also a really big market for men's care. And I know that Maycon, you've got some information about men's care as well.
Okay, this is very interesting point, Carlos, because if you look at the between 5 years, this segment increased in around 70%. Today, according to Euromonitor, this segment here in Brazil will bring only this year around 25, 26 billions of reais, around $5 billion only here in Brazil, and the past and the superior when you compare it to North America. It's very interesting segment because if you look at the formulation technology, it doesn't have a big innovation. However, it's most important here for focusing claiming and imagining the product. As you can see, this line it has this special line of a luxury cosmetic, not a simple cosmetic, but it bring exactly value. It's a all line. And another point is this segment has a lot influencing a website. When you here in Brazil have a 2 or 5 special websites dedicated for this consumer. When it's possible, look at many brands, many technologies. And this segment started around in 8 or 10 years ago when the barber shops saw this tendency. When you create a special place, it's when you look at a saloon bar, a special place for consumer, when you never remind the traditional saloon. And this brand has the focus more on the ingredients recognized a drink, for example, hope from beer, or labeling reminding a whiskey, or it is very interesting. And, as you can see, this brand has special products according to season, special product for a summer, for a winter. This is very interesting because the companies today look at demand different. Demand has an evolution. This is interesting. It's a very, very important segment.
That's
Okay.
great.
Mhm.
That's really helpful. And as I said, I think it's something that really stands out about Brazil kind of against other countries is usually it's much more women based. Everyone kind of highlights their claims there. But it's really interesting for to think about when you're doing product development, especially if you're looking at men's. The claims is really what you need to be looking at, and also those kinds of seasonal aspects. So that's really, really good information. So to break down the cosmetics market a little bit more in Latin America, I've got this really good diagram again from Statista. You can just see basically it's a huge market in Brazil compared to the other countries. Mexico is very much coming in second, but when you look at the difference in terms of where cosmetics are sold, Brazil's a really good market to be getting into when you're looking at Latin America. And certainly if we're looking at conducting studies for claim substantiation, it's definitely a really good place to be looking to place your studies. Because even if you're looking at, selling them the rest of Latin America, it's where your main consumer is going to be based. And it's going to be really applicable for claim substantiation to get their kind of reviews about those products. I also want to talk about COVID-19. It's something that we can't really avoid at the moment, unfortunately. We are in the middle of a global pandemic, and it's something to really think about in terms of testing, in terms of product development, and in terms of marketing your product as well. So there has been a drop. Of course, there's been a drop in sort of the economy in South America. That has been all over the world. The only thing that I've noticed when I was kind of looking into it is they're expecting Latin America and Caribbean, which are kind of grouped together in terms of economy, to be lagging behind with growth. So they'll take a little bit longer to catch back up. So it's a kind of expected regional growth of 3.6, and other countries is going to be about 5.2% in Latin America. So it is something to consider with your product development, that they may be a little bit behind, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to catch up. So please do think about marketing your products there already. Another really important thing is online sales. That's kind of the way of the world. We've really noticed that stores are getting closed. Particularly if you're in the UK, you'll notice there's some huge groups of stores that are now going to be closed, and they're all getting bought out by these online companies. And that's very much going to be the case in Latin America as well as kind of the rest of the world. So we can see there was a huge increase in online shopping. Across Chile had a huge increase, Puerto Rico. But what's really important with that as well is if your products are going online, it's a great opportunity to get your claims out there because you can put a lot of information online, but also it's really important to make sure those claims are compliant in those territories, because obviously you need to know about the regulation. And if you've got an online website, it might be global, and you really need to make sure those claims are substantiated in the key territories that you're selling those products as well, because there's just a lot more exposure when you're online. So on that kind of note, I want to talk about our ad self-regulation, because this is the way that countries regulate advertising across the world, and indeed in Latin America as well. So it's self-regulation because it's not necessarily a government body. It's a way for the industry to understand the codes, understand how they should be advertising, and to really follow those codes that are out there almost in good faith. if you're not following those codes, it's all dealt with on a complaints basis. So whether you're a consumer or you're a competitor, people might complain about your product to the organizations that are in charge of that ad self-regulation in those countries. So as I said, it's very much the same in Latin America, and I'll talk about some examples of those. So if you're in any way involved in advertising, and there's a really good breakdown there. So it's either the advertisers who are paying for the advertising agency is responsible for its form and content, or the media that carry it. So if you're kind of a distributor and you've got lots of brands on your website, you really need to make sure the adverts you're putting on there are compliant with those codes, with the organizations that are involved with that. So there's a couple of links there, which I find really handy when I'm sort of thinking about what organizations are going to be looking after those adverts and regulating them. So there's the International Chamber of Commerce, who have got a framework which countries can adopt. So it's a good place to start to see which countries have adopted that framework. And there's also the International Council of Ad Self-Regulation. And that's a council of lots of different of these SROs that have come together. They have a kind of membership basis, so you can easily access who is the regulator in that country. But they also have kind of shared values, and they put news out about advertising regulation as well. So in terms of ICAS, I've got some really good examples here of countries in Latin America that are part of that council. So we've got Mexico, El Salvador, Brazil, which we've already said is a really massive market, Chile and Colombia. It'd be great to hear about your experience, Maycon, for especially the advertising regulations in Brazil.
This is very pointed. When you talk about the CONAR has a responsibility to prevent the abuse advertising from causing embarrassment to consumer or companies, and to defend the freedom of a commercial expression. This is very interesting because sometimes the CONAR help or to manage between fighting between fighting companies. Example, if you put the advertisement about the faction, the first consumer law. If my company doesn't agree or uncomfortable with the message, I use this organ in Brazil for helping to manage. This organ doesn't have a law influence, just a friendly or negotiation. However, recently, a lot of companies jumped the corner and go directly a lawsuit in court. This is interesting because sometimes people uh, lose a lot of money depends the communication. And this corner doesn't have influence, it just manage a friendly or negotiation. But
Yeah.
it's normally company using CONAR. Sometimes the consumer use. The
Mm.
CONAR doesn't have it or pick up your label. Oh, you need to change this or this. Not just if you have this solicitation, especially in Brazil.
Exactly, yes. So it's really good to know what those advertising regulations are, because as you say, that people might go to them for negotiation, but if they skip that and go straight to a lawsuit, if you've already followed those advertising regulations, they won't have a lawsuit against you. But if they have skipped those, there's a lot more risk. So certainly if you're a European company, you don't really have that so much. There's not really tend to be lawsuits. It's all dealt with the advertising regulations. But it does show how important it is to be really aware of those regulations in Brazil in particular, because yeah, you don't want to lose lots of money in a lawsuit.
Correctly.
So the other thing to think about is advertising laws. So whether there is a regulatory body or not in the countries that you're selling, there will always be advertising laws. So it's really important to make sure that you're abiding by those as well. Certainly, again, to avoid a lawsuit, if you are kind of going with the laws, making sure you know what's going on, you can avoid those really hefty lawsuits. So I just pulled up a couple of countries to give you some examples of those. So in Argentina, Argentina, you've got the consumer protection law, which state that you must provide consumers with truthful, objective, and adequate information, which must be detailed, efficacious, and sufficient. So essentially, any of your claims need to be substantiated and they need to be objective. Otherwise, you could be in real problems with the consumer protection law. And in Peru, they have bans that affect the transparency of the market. So certainly when you're looking at competition laws, so if you're trying to kind of get above your competition, you need to be really, really cautious that you're not giving false information about your product, but also about your competitors' products. So certainly you see things like this is the best shampoo. If you're going to make a claim like that, you really need to have some very fair information, and you need to present that information when you're saying being transparent. If you have a study that says really clearly it's better, you need to be able to present that evidence as well. So it basically makes sure that your competition is protected as well. You're protected against your competition by making sure that everyone's got a level playing field and that you've all got this evidence. Just another note on COVID-19, and this is very much the case across the globe, which is why I've kind of put all of these really big advertising regulations out there. So you've got ICAS, you've got Europe, you've got America with the FDA, and you've got Latin America with CONAR. And we need to make sure that we're not using the pandemic to promote products and make claims about them, which would mean that people would kind of be misled to buying them. I think things have calmed down a bit now, but certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, you'd see many products that said things like, this will protect you against COVID-19, or it could even cure it, which is obviously not true. We know that there's no cure necessarily, but hopefully the vaccines will help. But obviously we can't have any products that are marketing to do anything that is unsubstantiated, particularly to do with COVID-19. It's essentially exploiting people's fear to sell products, which is why these advertising bodies exist. It's to protect the consumers and make sure they're not misled. So there's also information about cosmetic registration. So in Brazil in particular, we've got Anvisa. And what I wanted to bring up with them in particular is they have to register your products with them, your cosmetics. And as part of that registration, you have to include your test results, which prove the product's claims. So this is more thinking, we've got the advertising regulations. We know we need to substantiate the claims for them. But even with your cosmetic product, if you have any claims about your product, you also need to make sure you've got those substantiated and that you're showing that at the registration point. Maycon, I know you've got some really good information about Anvisa as well, if you'd like to talk a bit more on that.
Yes, it's different than other country. Here in Brazil, we have, according to told, two groups according to risk the product. The first is grade 1, it's just notification. For you look at this technology, most important using RDC, 17 from February 2014, when the grade 1 have around 42 technology. And then another, the grade 2, this is most important delegation because you need to registration, you need to provide the benefits, the safety, the claim. And this list has cleaning products, sunscreen, children's sunscreen, antiseptic, hand gel, hair styling, hair dyeing, insect repellent, and children's insect repellent. And normally, when you go to this process in online, normally you receive the feedback around in 3 months. Depends a lot. The grade 1, no, it's immediately after to finish. They put all the information in the website, and then you have the number for putting your label. However, depends the claim. Sometimes this has a big influence too. Not only product technology, the claims too has this influence.
Yeah, definitely. It's very similar in Europe as well. Again, for anyone that is part of the EU and part of the registration there, of course, it's not just about how your product is made, it's about how you present it as well. So you need to make sure you've got the right information for the product categories that are needed for the registration there.
Yeah. In the last 2018 has a new RDC 237 When you review these listed products, it's more flexible. But my suggestion here, you look at these two RDCs, the 7 and 237
Great.
pages.
What I'll do is when I do the follow-up for this webinar, I'm going to quote those RDCs as well, so everyone's got the numbers, because I don't think I'll remember that. So amazing. So we've kind of talked about the regulations, about advertising, and everything to do with claims. But now I really want to talk about how we actually substantiate those claims, because obviously we know we need to. It's obviously very clear in Latin America. But obviously, how do you get that data? How do you get that evidence to make sure you're protected? And then you can say what you want about your product, basically. So there's different test methodologies you can do. There's kind of clinical testing and consumer testing tend to be the two main sort of ways you can go. Ayton Global Research specialises in consumer testing. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. There's obviously a place for clinical, and we can certainly help support with that through our partners as well. But I really want to focus on consumer testing because I think it's very important, even if you have clinical data, to make sure you've got some evidence about the actual use of the product. So that's what we're looking at reflecting. They're called in-use tests very commonly. Usually people are sent products to test at home and they answer online questionnaires about the products. So that's kind of the main methodology we're looking at. And as I say, it's reflecting what would happen if a consumer was to buy your product and use it exactly how you've asked for your kind of instructions on your labels and everything like that, and really see if they can perceive those benefits that you're hoping to achieve with your claims. So they can assess the efficacy of the one product or compare it, as I mentioned earlier, in competition. They can compare the product as well. You may need additional evidence. And what we tend to do is we work with clients in a way that you can send us all the claims that you're looking to substantiate. And we will say what we can do with consumer research and what we might need additional evidence for as well. This is still a really effective way of running your studies, because very comparatively to clinical testing, where you need an instrumental study for every single different claim, for consumer testing, we can ask them all of the claims to review. And as I said, if there's sort of one or two that we really need to back up with some clinical evidence, we can look at doing that as well.
Just one additional point in relation to this light cards. I
Yeah.
think it's most important that you use the consumer testing, not only during the product development or the new product. I have a lot of experience when you need to replace the product in the market. Sometimes you have a excellent product, the consumers know, love your product. When you need to change it, this is a big difficult for us R&D. In that case, the consumer test helped us a lot because I had a R&D feeling, but it's a totally different the consumer. I had a lot fighting. I know the R&D people. No, look at this product, more stability, more dry, blah blah blah. But the consumers saw this influence. The consumer had this feeling. This is a big challenge when you need to replace the interesting or a first product you have in the market. This is most important. Use this key for help us the R&D.
Absolutely. There's a huge reason. Exactly. I focus a lot on the claim side, but actually it's really a big part of product development. And certainly I've kind of got some other reasons to use it here. And that really relates to that. Things like reformulation. And particularly right now, we're really seeing that happen. A lot of COVID-19's had an impact there where people couldn't get certain ingredients, had to reformulate. And actually Brexit is causing it. I know this is more to do with Latin America, but if you're a European country, you want to launch into Latin America, or you've already launched that there, and you find that you're going to change your suppliers because of things like Brexit or for any other reason, you need to make sure the consumers can really perceive those effects still. We get it a lot for things, especially things like changes in fragrance. So if you've got a really heavily fragrance shower gel, for example, we've had kind of our clients say, we've got this new fragrance, we want to test it with people that usually use that one, but we also want to do a comparison of our old one and our new one and see if there's any significant difference. And it really helps you have confidence in that product launch to make sure that the formula is still going to be accepted the same. Another great claim you can get out of that is, if you kind of want to go down the claims route, you can actually make the claim new and improved formula. if there's a significant difference in the way it's perceived and it's significantly better, it really gives you that opportunity to make that claim as well.
Yeah,
So there's, oh, sorry.
yeah, it's
Please.
very interesting you talk about fragrance because I need expertise in sunscreen. Sometimes you need to replacement the filters or how material. But use the same fragrance. The people no, the same fragrance it doesn't change it. They no change it because I changed the chemistry formula. I changed the film. I changed the emulsifier. This is maybe it doesn't change the fragrance how material, but the formulation, the structure receive the fragrance change. This is an excellent example you show.
Exactly. Yeah. I think if the formulation changes, you always need to make sure you've done your research to see, what the effects are, what's the change there. Absolutely. So you can also do comparisons for things like benchmark testing. So as I mentioned earlier, it might be against competitors, not always to make a claim against them, but to see where you sit in the market. It's a really good way to do that. There's also things like investigating new markets. So as I mentioned, you may not have launched into Latin America yet, and it could be a really good chance for you just to see how your product's perceived there. Certainly with the product performance, you can even ask about branding and you can ask about price points. Certainly for consumer studies, we're running things unbranded because we want to make sure we have unbiased data behind the claims. But there's no reason why, after we've asked the volunteers about the product and got all of the efficacy claims substantiated, we can't then kind of show them the branding after and say, okay, now you've said you like the product, what do you think about this branding? So it can be really seen as a market research as well. It doesn't have to just be seen as this kind of really technical side, even though it is. So there's some really good other reasons to use it there. I've also put things like testimonials and photos and videos, because at the end of the day, you really want to use this data to push out your marketing as much as you possibly can. So it just really gives you some really good opportunities there. There's some claims I've put there that you might see really commonly through consumer research. So people saying their hair looks and feels healthier, recommending the product, things like skin feel. So again, it's all really subjective. It's all about perception, but anything to do with what people can perceive with look and feel, that's what we can substantiate. So we see these claims everywhere. So people always ask me, where can I use these claims? What am I allowed to use them on? The truth is you can use them on any platform. It's valid data to use as evidence for any of your claims, but it's always really nice to see that visually and see how that is being used by really big brands out there. So I've picked up on 3 brands that are using consumer trials or user trials, depending what they call it, and using those in their marketing online. So we've got Charlotte Tilbury, L'Oreal, and Elemis. And you can see they've all got these lovely percentage claims that really say about, as I said, the look and feel and things like that. The L'Oreal hair one's quite an interesting one because it's specifically for anti-dandruff. And they've said it looks visibly flake-free. And as you can see, they've done a consumer test to substantiate that as well. So it really gives you an idea of the amount of claims that are out there and how they've presented those results. We also have social media, which again is huge at the moment. And I think a lot of people are really loving to use their consumer testing to push out these results. It makes your brand look very trustworthy because you have some real data behind it to say what those claims are, particularly in a world where I think people are really cracking down on influencers that are kind of giving their opinion. And I saw it in the ASA this week that someone had used a filter, and unfortunately the brand didn't ask them to, but they'd used it anyway. So obviously they got in trouble with the advertising standards. So it's a really good way of making sure that you have that trust behind your brand, that you actually have the research behind it. So I've got some examples here from Origins and Temple Spa because they've done some lovely displays of their claims there. Claims and labels and packaging as well. It needs to be substantiated, obviously. This is a really good quote that was on the ICAS website because it's something people think of as very different information, what they're putting on their packaging and what they're putting online. But at the end of the day, it does all need to be substantiated. And again, Maycon, I know you've got some really good information about labeling, particularly in Brazil.
Yeah, very interesting because when you launch here in product in Brazil, you have different guideline or RDC. Example for repellent, it's a 19 from 2013. It's a sunscreen, uh, RDC 30 from at the 2012. It depends the product. Special when you have the grade two, it's most important to check the special mandatory labeling. And recently, you have not directly labeling impacted, but one claim impacted, another label impacted. When you talk about the claiming in 2019, you had a new RDC guideline. It's a 288 when it's a mandatory provide the dosaging of the active, the sunscreen, repellent, vitamin C. It's a formal, it's a mandatory now. If you registration, it's mandatory. It's a created a big confusion because this guide is not clear, but now it's mandatory. In another guideline, this is last November, the 2000 last year, November last year. When you this year after November, it's a mandatory put in labeling the ENC name in Portuguese too. Think about Carey, it's a big impact. The money, the process this is had this discussion long years. 24 years ago, you had in Brazil labeling only Portuguese, changed it for both, uh, and you understand the use the same globally only in English, Cozinki, and now you have this new direction. After November this year, it's a mandatory put both E and in English or Cozinki and Portuguese here in Brazil.
It's a lot of information to get translated, and I think it's a good argument as well for making sure you've got evidence in from in Portuguese essentially as well as in English. So when you're looking at putting your claims out there, they should always be verbatim to your questionnaire. So if you're asking your consumers about a claim, it should be put in that way in your presentation. So if you need to put your claims in Portuguese, you should be asking Portuguese volunteers in Portuguese about these claims, because then you can exactly quote it instead of translating it. So that's really good information to know.
Yeah.
So I've got a case study here as well, about basically how we're really looking at conducting that consumer research, because it's all very well and good to say how to do it, but this gives you a really good picture of how we design a study, how we run it, and what those results look like as well. So in this case, we were looking at a company that has now been owned by a Brazilian company. We're looking at a body moisturizer, a hemp body moisturizer. So we need to make sure we've got the advertising standards, we're meeting up with their code in Latin America, but also need to make sure that we're substantiating the most effective claims. So they really wanted to look at the claims about the look and feel of very dry skin types. So to make sure we're improving those very, very dry skin types. So the study design for this, obviously we conducted it in Brazil. It was a single placement product, and which means we were just investigating one. So it wasn't compared with anything else. We're just investigating that one product. It's a 2-week study, which is plenty enough for this case because we wanted to have very instant results. We didn't want to improve over lots of time. We wanted it to make sure the skin had improved in that short period of time. The participants had to have very dry skin, and obviously this is self-assessed. As I said, this is actual use. So if someone's perception of their skin is very dry, we need to make sure we've included that. They needed to already use a body moisturizer. We didn't want to come and use someone who's never used a body moisturizer before because it would be kind of unfair. Of course, it's going to moisturize the skin. We want to make sure it's better than what they're using already. And we had a nice wide age range here of 18 to 45 years old because that was the market for this product. So again, you really want to make sure you're specifying the consumer you know is going to be purchasing your product and making sure you're testing on them. So this is the results. Obviously, this is translated into English for the purpose of this webinar. So this is the claims that we were looking at. So this comes from our report. We get a lovely summary table, which is very, very obvious what the claims were that we were asking. We've got the number of people that were satisfied, had a neutral response, or were not satisfied, and then the percentages as well. So this is great for your claims because for two reasons. You need to make sure you've got a certain percentage have agreed with each question to be able to make that claim. So over 66% is seen as a statistical majority. For things like Clearcast in the UK, so if you want to advertise on television, it needs to be over 70%. And that's the case with other platforms as well. So there may be platforms in Latin America that mean they have a certain percentage that you need to meet up with to be able to use those claims. So as I said, we always make sure as a very minimum, we've got a statistical majority. But really let us know where you're going to be using your data, because it'll make sure we're giving you the right information about what your pass mark is. So these little claims are all got a little star, little asterisk by them, because it means they've gone over that pass mark so we can use them. And in fact, they're actually very high percentages we've managed to get for this product. So the first one is my skin feels protected from dryness with 94%. If you think you can lift that straight into your social media and say 94% of women agreed that their skin felt protected from dryness. And it's lovely claims to be able to use. Other things to do with, skin tightness that you feel if it's very dry is soothed. Skin feeling deeply replenished with moisture, really lovely claims there. And then it gives a natural looking glow as well. So as I mentioned earlier, you really want to look at the feel and the look with consumer research, because you can get some excellent claims either way. I also want to bring up the regulation for this one in particular, because we were looking at Brazil in particular. And as I mentioned earlier, they all have a code. So this is lifted straight from the code for CONAR. And they say that all descriptions, claims, and comparisons that relate to facts or objective data must be supported by the evidence. And you must provide that evidence when requested. So that's always a really big thing as well. As we say, this is very self-regulated. You could technically put products on the market and hope for the best, hope no one gives you a lawsuit, hope no one complains about the product. But if they do complain about it, you need to be able to provide that evidence straight away. So if you imagine you put a claim out there saying, I don't know, better looking skin in 8 weeks, we would have to run the study for 8 weeks to be able to get that evidence. And no one's going to wait around for you to conduct that study if you've already been marketing it that way. So really important to consider. So I'm going to go for a question and answer in a minute, but before I do so, I just want to let you know why you should use Ayton Global Research in particular. So obviously I've talked about consumer research and having your claims substantiated, but why should you choose us? So we're an award-winning research agency. We've won awards for international business and for family business. We're completely compliant with the GDPR, which is obviously a European regulation. It doesn't necessarily apply in Latin America, but what's really important about it is it means that our volunteers' data is really protected, no matter where it is globally, but also your data is really protected because obviously you give us really sensitive information about your claims and your ingredient lists. So we've got an ISO 27001, which shows that we are audited on that process as well as an ISO 9001, which is to do with quality assurance. We all have undesirable event reporting. So alongside these consumer research studies, it's really important to be able to gain data on any undesirable events that are reported. And that's also in accordance with the Cosmetic Vigilance Act. People need to be given the opportunity to say if they've had any irritations to the product. We've got full product liability insurance in all the countries that we operate to make sure that our consumers, again, are protected, and so are you. We are a partner to the Market Research Society. So we have training on things like study design and questionnaire design, but it also shows that we're very ethical in the research we conduct. We have bespoke regulatory advice, which is what I give you, and certainly what Maycon will be able to support on as well. And you also get a designated study manager. So you get one point of contact throughout your study process, so you're not passed around a team. Just a couple of FAQs before we go to the question and answer. So people always ask me, what panel size do I need? Well, it really depends on your claims and your products, but generally it starts at around 100 responses for robust data. This can change depending on, I don't know, if you want to claim like all skin types or all hair types. Obviously, we need to make sure we've got significant people in each subgroup. But really, 100 responses is a really good place to think when you're wondering how many products you have to provide and stuff like that. I have talked about product liability insurance already, but we do need to make sure the samples have been safety tested as well. What kind of safety testing do they need? It will depend on the product again. So whatever it needs to be able to be launched on the market, so to prove that it's safe for the consumers, that's what we need, because that's what we're replicating. We're giving people products to test at home, so we need to make sure they're safe to use. I already mentioned earlier that they should be blind, so there shouldn't be any branding, because otherwise it gives a bias to your data and it might not be accepted by those advertising authorities. And you can always make sure that your questionnaire design, as I said earlier, it needs to be verbatim to these claims, and we can give you some really good support on that as well. So I'd love to open up to a question and answer now. Please feel free to type in, but I do have a question for Maycon, because I want to know about stability testing in Brazil, because I know you've said before that there are some sort of iffy guidelines when it comes to stability testing.
Very interesting this topic, because you had a special guideline from 2004, but it's just a guide, just to give it the direction for companies. For this is not a mandatory. However, when you 2018 has this new RDC 28080, when you mandatory dosage and the activity, the Anvisa use this guide for support and send the mandatory answers. Example, this RDC, when you need to dosage the activity, tell just give me the dosage, the activity, and the range. That's it. However, when you send the material, the report for Anvisa, Anvisa is back to you with many questions. Shows me the stability in high temperature, give me the supporting for 3 months the stability. If you use the range superior to 10%, shows me the safety and the support for safety and security and the performance of the product. This is created a big confusion here in Brazil, because it doesn't have a mandatory or direction about this. The Anvisa used the law from drugs, the medicaments. The medicament is the mandatory when you have the temperature, the time, the range is mandatory, but this is a cosmetic. Based on this, in 2010, I created this handling my company. Uh, Together with me has one person with more 30 years analytical technically. When you use my background information together this, my partner in analytical for support the company. Why? When you talk, especially sunscreen, uh, the sunscreen, you had many direction for you, many influencing for you have the SPF labeling, the concentration activity correctly, but you have influence in the ester, emulsifier, the spreadability of the product, the technology, the synergism of a sunscreen, but the dosations, no. The dosation depends more the stability of the product, the homogenization the product, the distribution of the missile the product. This is my influence in that point. Helps to company to solve this issue, the dosation. But it had a lot of discussion, and in that case, my suggestion for people check more the process, who understand more the process, manufacture process, who understand more the mixing, time mixing, and the how material addition and determinate step of the product. This is a new challenge if you need to launching or rerouting the sunscreen or insect repellent or products which are vitamin C precursors. The
That's
big challenge now.
That's not great. It's great information,
No,
but it's not great regulation. But that's really great to know that you can support. So yeah, if you do need to have any support in terms of stability testing, please do feel free to reach out to Maycon. And I will also be sending out, just for anyone who wants any more information, when I do the follow up for this event, I'll send Maycon's presentation for his company as well, just to give you a bit more information about all the services that he can help with. Because as well as stability testing and all the labeling and everything that we've discussed, that there's a lot of support that Maycon can provide. So I haven't got any more questions come in, which is absolutely fine, because I'll also put our contact information in that follow-up. So if you have any questions later on down the line, please do feel free to reach out to myself and Maycon, and we're really happy to help. So I have got a couple of upcoming webinars as well for anyone that wants to join them. So next week, I'm going to be looking at substantiating claims for electrical products. So this can be anything from a toaster to a hairdryer, and we'll be looking at what the testing implications are for those particular types of products. There's also the week after, so on the 19th, we've got the consumer research from panel sizes. I touched on this a bit earlier, but it will really give you some background information on how we make those decisions by what panel sizes are needed. And then on the 26th, I'll be joined by my German franchisee, which is Thomas Marquardt, and we'll be talking about beauty trends and the claims and what the kind of predictions are there for 2021. I also want to put your attention towards the SCS, the Society of Cosmetic Scientists. They have a distance learning course in the Essentials of Cosmetic Science, which you can do anywhere in the world. So please do look at their website there. And there's also going to be the IFSCC Congress in September 2022. So hopefully that will go ahead in person by then. I'm very, very optimistic. But you can register your interest for that now, so you'll be kept up to date. So there's my contact information there. But as I said, I'm going to follow up on an email with both mine and Maycon's contact information. Maycon, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining me today. It's been invaluable to have your input.
thank you, Carey, again for the opportunity. I'm very proud.
Okay. Thank you everyone for joining today, and I'll be following up shortly. Bye.
Bye-bye.